They claim that our eyes were just either slightly different from what they are, or we thought we see things are.
Welcome to Strange Familiars. Allison,
Yes.
how are you doing on this fine Wednesday?
It's a little rainy, but it's nice. Cooled it off a little bit.
I hope so. I want last week's weather.
Yeah, like all year round.
Yeah,
I want sun till 9 o'clock.
I don't care about that.
I want sun till 9 o'clock. And I want 70 degrees, no humidity, clear blue skies.
Down to the 40s at night.
Down to the... Yeah, that's ideal.
Yeah, I'm happy with the 40s at night.
Where can you live where that happens all the time?
I don't know. Tonight, we have a pretty awesome episode. Now, saying that, all of our episodes are, of course, awesome. But tonight, I'm going to be talking with Randy, who has these experiences with what a few years ago they were calling a rake. And now they've changed it. They call them pale crawlers now. I'm not sure which name I prefer.
Oh, I like the old school rake.
Rake. Which will put a different spin on these creatures. I think some people, I don't know why, because cryptid people want to think everything is like a breeding monster that's out there, that you can find and put in a cage. I think a lot of people have treated these things almost like they're a cryptid, like there's something, again, that could be put in a cage or something. Randy's story is going to put a little bit of a different spin on that. And Strange Familiars is involved a little bit. Brother Richard is involved a little bit more. So after we talk to Randy, I'll be talking with Brother Richard, and he'll be doing some discussion and commentary on the story. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get to my talk with Randy, the Pale Crawler. I'd like to welcome Randy to Strange Familiars. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Tim. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to get your stories. You mentioned it on the Strange Familiars Discord that your family had some encounters with these things they're calling pale crawlers. What were they calling them before? I always forget.
I think they kind of started as like a rake,
Yes.
because they were referring to them based off of the creepypasta thing.
Yeah, they were.
That's kind of how it started. Yeah.
Yep, they were calling them rakes before, and now I think now the term is generally pale crawler. Whatever they are, they're creepy, and I'm super interested to get these stories. So how did all this start?
Well, roughly 10-ish years ago, my parents moved from Southern California to Central California. And the house that they moved into is a very nice, pretty house, but the upstairs has always just been a bit creepy, especially at night. So my parents' bedroom is fine, but there's like an office, a guest room, a bathroom, different things up there. And anytime you're up there at night, if you're not turning right towards my parents' room, if you go left to anywhere the rest of the upstairs, you would kind of always just keep eyes forward, not look down any dark hallways or any open doorways, just because you always felt like something was watching you, and it was always just strange feeling. And all of us siblings felt that way, like me, my wife, my brothers and sisters, like anyone who was over there were always just really creeped out upstairs at night. And it's just the way it is. And my mom and my pops, like they're very, very charismatic Christian, don't want to acknowledge anything is there most of the time. But my mom has had experiences her entire life. She's like one of those like super experiencer people, but she kind of tries to ignore it so it goes away because there's a lot of fear on her side with it.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So yeah, it was always like that for, again, since roughly the end of 2013. And then my first kind of encounter with this thing, I'm just going to start there, then I'll work back to what I heard from my mom.
Okay.
So basically between like probably October-ish of 2018, it could have been early November, there was about a month and a half period where between college and my first post-college job, I did military first, but then went to college. So in between college and my first post-college job in the laboratory, we stayed with my parents for about a month and a half while we were moving from SoCal to NorCal. And while we were there, my wife was pregnant. My parents didn't know this yet because she was just coming up on 3 months. So no one was aware but me and her, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And we were sleeping in a guest room downstairs. There was a few times where my wife would wake me up where she'd get little sleep paralysis things in that room, and she'd say there's something in a particular corner of the room. And she would ask me to pray it away, make it go away. Because typically when I tell something to leave, it usually does. And so we had a few things like that. She'd get a little bit weirded out, but it was nothing like being upstairs. So she would just, if something bothered her, she'd wake me up and then she'd be fine the rest of the night.
Just to pause a second. So she would be in sleep paralysis. She would see something.
She never really told me what, but she would it was always in kind of like the same corner of that room that she'd be like, there's something over there, whatever. And she doesn't like to describe too much. My wife is Latina, very kind of culturally Catholic, and I think with her family they just don't try not to talk about it too much.
Okay.
They all acknowledge it, but they try not to talk about it too much because they don't want to invite anything.
But she would somehow wake you up.
Yeah, if there's something once she was able to move around or do whatever, she would wake me up and hey, I'm having trouble, this whatever's bothering me. And
Okay.
It just happened a couple times, and
Mm-hmm.
it's been this way our whole relationship. If anything bothers her, usually she can tell me and I'll do prayers or just addressing the space that it's in or whatever. I don't really see too much usually myself, but
Mm-hmm.
I can usually confront something whether I can see it or not, and usually it will go away typically.
Okay. So the prayer or whatever you're doing has been effective.
Yes, at that point, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so, all we would do then is just kind of kick it out of the guest room and whatever, let us be. And I don't know for sure if what she was seeing in the guest room where we were is the same thing that me and my mom experienced. I don't know if it's the same thing because my wife hasn't really described it, but it's just, that's the setting of what was going on during this time.
Okay.
And so me, myself, I've only ever had one sleep paralysis adjacent experience. And this was years prior, where I could move and stuff, but I wasn't paralyzed, so that's why I say adjacent. So I don't typically get that. I don't typically fight in my sleep, or I might turn around to be comfortable, but I'm not one to if I'm having a struggle in a dream or something like that, I'm not one to lash out or move or swing a fist or do anything like that, really struggle outwardly. So we were there, and also because she was pregnant, there was a bathroom that was right next to us, 3 feet from her head in the guest room, but it was super loud. So if I woke up in the middle of the night and I needed to use the restroom, I would typically just walk upstairs to the creepy upstairs and walk down the long dark hallway to the upstairs bathroom so that I didn't wake her with a very loud toilet and all that stuff. And so one night I wake up, don't know exactly what time, could have been 2, could have been 4, I'm not sure. Again, this is October-ish of 2018. I wake up, have to use the restroom, decide I'm not going to risk waking up my pregnant wife, and so I'm going to go out and go up the stairs. And so I go out. I don't have any lights on. I don't have any lights with me. I have relatively decent night vision. So it's dark, but I can see good enough to make my way. And I start going up the stairs, and maybe halfway or so up the stairs, I just get this sudden weird knowing that there's something up around the corner at the top of the stairs. So just really quick, when you go up this set of stairs to the upstairs, it basically goes onto an open balcony over the 2-story living room. If you go right across the landing, it immediately goes into my parents' room, and then you can either go left down towards bathroom, office, or cook a U-turn around the wall that the stairs goes up. And that U-turn around that wall goes towards the other guest room and laundry room. And so when I was going up the stairs, all of a sudden I just had this in my gut, everything screaming at me, there's something around that U-turn bend of the wall at the top of the stairs, and it knows you're coming up and it's waiting for you and it wants to get you. And I'm kind of freeze for just a moment. And then instead of doing the smart thing and turning my happy ass back around and going back downstairs and just using the bathroom down there, I decide to kind of slow way down and I guess kind of get down on all fours on the stairs and kind of bear crawl up the stairs very slowly. And the idea is that I'm going to keep low on the stairs and see if I can peek my head around the corner of this wall and see if I can see what's there without it seeing me by staying low and by being quiet. That's the idea.
And at this point, did you have any feeling like this is a human intruder, or did you just sort of intuit that this is something weird, this is something other?
There was no sense of what it was, just that there was something there.
Okay.
Like, I didn't specifically think human or paranormal, but just something. Like, if I had thought about it, maybe I would have gone paranormal just because of where we were. But at the time, I wasn't thinking that. I was just thinking there's something there, and I want to know what it is. And so I bear crawl my way very slowly up the stairs, and right as I get to the top, I'm on all fours, and I kind of slowly start trying to turn my head and shoulder around the U-turn of that wall, and I get grabbed. And there is something low to the ground that's like humanoid shape, cold, clammy skin, no hair on it that I can see, and it's very strong. It's roughly the size of a person, but I'm assuming that the limbs are longer, because as it's trying to rip me around this wall and I'm fighting against it, and it's so strong. The only reason it's not ripping me around this wall is because basically the vast majority of my body is like hooked 180 degrees around the wall that it's on, because it is like a normal standard wall, kind of U-turn around that wall. So most of my body is on the side of the wall with the stairs. It's got me by like my arm or whatever, and it's trying to yank me around that corner into that hallway down by where the laundry room is, and that guest room, which is also a craft room for my mom. And it's very dark. I can't see very well, but I'm just immediately fight and flight mode. I'm trying to fight and pull away from this thing as hard as I can. I'm trying to get away from it because I don't want to know what happens if it pulls me around that corner.
Yeah.
From what I could see in the dark, it seemed like, I mean, when you're dark, you don't really have much color vision, but it seemed like it was kind of mottled grayish skin. It kind of looked, it looked basically like that very classic creepypasta security cam photo of the rake.
Okay.
That's kind of what it looked like, right? Except it wasn't blurry. It was just like there in the dark. The skin was cold and clammy. And the other thing that made it weird was it was super low to the ground like I was, except it wasn't like crawling the way I was. Its arms and its legs were like splayed out to the side like a lizard or a spider. Like that kind of like elbows out, whatever thing. So that's why I'm guessing that I didn't think about it much at a time, but I heard someone else talking about one of these recently, and they were talking about the long limbs, and I was thinking, well, maybe that's what it was. Maybe the limbs must have been longer because of the way everything was splayed out to the side, like the knees and legs, and then also the arms, except for the one that had me, were very lizard-like, spider-like, and just the conformation of the limbs. And so its torso was like probably no more than a foot above the ground, but it was the size of a person-ish, plus however long its limbs might have been. And I couldn't see the whole thing. I don't know if I saw eyes or not. If there were eyes, they weren't like the glowing thing that you sometimes hear in stories. There was nothing like that. I don't know for sure there's eyes or not. I wasn't focused on that so much as I was focused on what was holding on to me in the general outline and shape of it, and trying to not let myself get pulled around that wall. Right?
Sure.
So this is happening. Then all of a sudden, my wife is just like shaking me really hard, saying, babe, what's wrong? What's wrong? What are you doing? Why are you doing that? What's going on? And she's shaking me awake. And I'm like, oh, was that a dream? I thought I was upstairs. Like, I thought I went upstairs to the bathroom. Was I dreaming? But it didn't feel like a dream. It felt like it happened.
Yeah.
Right? And so I was confused, and she was confused because I guess as she woke up to me, like, thrashing around, hyperventilating, like doing all these things that I never do, even when I have the worst nightmare. I don't do those things in my sleep. I might occasionally breathe slightly harder than usual, but otherwise there's not much indication of what's going on when I'm sleeping, no matter what I'm dreaming about. And so I'm thrashing around, like hyperventilating, all this stuff in my sleep. So she wakes me up and I'm like, oh God, it was the most horrible nightmare. I don't understand. Why did I think I was up there? Why did I think that's what happened? And then I got back out of the bed, and since I was awake and she was awake, I went to the restroom right there in the bathroom next to us, and didn't go upstairs, and went to sleep for the night. That's how my part of this started. And again, they've been there since like 2013. This was around 2018, so we've already known that things are like weird and creepy upstairs. Like, one of my brothers thinks that he's sometimes, because the landing, like at the top of the stairs between there and my parents' room, like I said, there's a balcony, overlooks the 2-story living room. So like one of my brothers has seen little things, as he has said, like kind of running around up there on that landing when he's downstairs in the living room. And like I said, pretty much everyone talks about how creepy it can be in there. But I think, oh, thank God, it's just a dream.
Right. Yeah.
And so I go a few months, it might even be like a year or so, but it's at least a few months. Like we've completed our transition to Northern California. My wife has our kid, all that. And eventually, like, because my family, we are a very weird family with lots of weird things that happen to us all the time. Whenever it's just me and my mom's side of the family, like my mom's sisters or whatever, and we're up late at night, we'll kind of reminisce about all the weird things that we've seen or been around or heard or whatever. And we kind of just share stories back and forth. And so one point, like however many months or so after that, after my son is born, I mentioned to my mom this dream that I had, and I'm describing everything to her, and she says, "Oh, you mean the spider thing?" And I said, "What do you mean the spider thing?" She's like, "I never told you about the spider thing in here?"
Whoa.
I'm like, "No." And this is not weird coming from my mom. My mom sees things, spiritual things, most of which she thinks are demons her entire life, just because of the way her religious beliefs are.
Mm-hmm.
She's occasionally seen things that she thinks are good and are angels, but most of the time she's seen nasty things her whole life. It really affected her as a teenager, made things very, very dark for her in her life then, and all sorts of stuff went on. And it got a little bit lessened as she came into her later teenage years until she had me. Then it kind of ramped up a little bit again. It's just something she's always lived with. She's always seen weird things. And so she tells me, "Oh yeah, when we moved in," and again, this would have been 5 or 6 years before we're having this conversation. She's like, "When we moved in here, I was home and I was unpacking boxes in the living room, and no one was home, like my pops was at work or whatever. So she was just there unpacking boxes in the living room. And in that 2-story living room is a fireplace with bricks that go all the way up those 2 stories until it hits the ceiling. And she says, as I'm sitting there unpacking the boxes, I noticed that there's something on the fireplace. And I kind of glance over, or this is her saying this, like she kind of glances over and she sees something about a third of the way up the bricks of the fireplace that is kind of got that Predator movie, blurred camo, distorted light, whatever thing to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it is perched like vertically, holding on to the bricks of the fireplace, maybe a third of the way up the 2-story fireplace. And it is basically, its back is to her, but it has its head turned around from what she can make out from like the weird kind of slightly shadowy, blurry light. Its head is kind of turned around and it's looking at her, and she can't see it clearly, but she notices it looking at her, and it notices that she notices. And when that happens, it's basically spider crawls with its like limbs kind of splayed out to the side, the way that I saw this thing in the hallway upstairs, kind of spider crawls its way up the bricks of the fireplace from what I remember saying, and kind of just goes through the ceiling at the top of the fireplace, like the ceiling's not there.
Yeah.
Just spider crawls up the bricks, and again, roughly human size, and goes through the ceiling and is gone. And that was when she was moving into the place, and she periodically saw the thing here and there, and not normally very clearly. Sometimes she would see it down at the end of the hallway when she was upstairs coming out of her room. Sometimes she'd see it in the hallway that goes down to the bathroom. Sometimes the hallway down towards like where I experienced the thing. And so she's telling me this, and I'm like, holy crap, maybe that wasn't a dream.
So she's seen it multiple times.
Oh yeah, multiple times.
And is it always in the Predator kind of form, or is it?
Yeah, I think it definitely starts off that way. Later on, things kind of ramp up.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll try to be patient.
No, you're all good. Ask as much as you want. So she tells me this, and it's funny because I start teasing her a little bit. I'm like, but you always say there's nothing here. We always tell you how creepy it is upstairs. She's like, yeah, but I don't want to talk about it. Like, I don't want to give it power. I don't want to acknowledge it. Like, in her mind, it's probably something demon-y, evil. It is nasty. It is nasty.
And she does have to live there. You know, that's always a thing. She
Yes.
has to live with it. Yeah.
Yes, and this is her whole life where she's been dealing with stuff like this, and she does her best to just she has that whole, like, you look into the abyss looks back mentality, like, just try and pretend it's not there, as long as it's not actively doing something to you. And so my family being what it is, like, we all start kind of talking about this, and we're trying to figure out, well, what happened with me? Like, with this corroboration from my mom, like, at that point, between that and the fact that it didn't feel like a dream, it felt like something that was really happening. I kind of throw the idea of a nightmare out the window. To me, I experienced something. And so that what my brother-in-law kind of came up with was, well, maybe I somehow was accidentally, like, doing some sort of astral travel type thing and just didn't realize I had done it, because I've done that once or twice before where I accidentally do something and I've never done that on purpose. I've accidentally done something like that and scared the crap out of myself and then came to in my body. But so my brother-in-law suggested the idea, well, maybe you didn't realize it, but you somehow left your body in some astral projection type fashion and you were going up the stairs like you would. He thinks that's why I was able to see this thing clearly, even though it was dark. Like, that it wasn't blurred, it wasn't like the camouflage thing. I was able to see it as much as I could in the shadows. And so he's like, well, maybe that's why, because maybe you're astral traveling somehow on accident. And so you were kind of in its realm, so you guys could see each other.
That's right where my head went, and that's what I was going to suggest. Like, you were somehow out of body, not on purpose, or is that... Sometimes I think some of these things can pull you out of body, which is truly scary, but...
Yeah, with a lot of the abduction stuff.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that was my thought. Like, you were somehow out of body, and that's why you were able to see it clearly. Interesting. Very interesting.
At some point after this, because before I found your show, I'm a patron of, like, Shannon LeGros show, Into the Fray. So I chat on the Discord on there before I found you, and one of the guys on there came up with another, in my mind, much worse suggestion, which I am just hoping is not the thing, where he said, well, what if you weren't astral projecting? And he's open to some of the woo stuff, but he kind of more usually defaults to the more nuts and bolts, flesh and blood style stuff. But he is open to the stuff. But his idea was, what if you did wake up and you did go up those stairs and there was something there and it did grab you and it was like an abduction scenario where you blacked out, and then whenever it was done doing what it did, you were placed back in your bed the way sometimes people who are abducted wake up in different spots. You were placed back in your bed, and then after you were back in your bed, that's when you started flipping out, and your wife woke up to you flipping out, and you just didn't know that any time had passed. And so I don't like that idea at all. Like, when he told me that, I was like, oh, hell no. Like, no, thank you. I'd much rather it be some weird accidental astral thing, but that is another possibility that's on the table that I truly hope is not what happened. I hope that it was just some astral thing, and my wife, like, the fact that I was struggling so hard in my sleep, my wife waking me up kind of like jolted me back to my body. That's where I want to stay, just because it's much less scary to me than the alternative that Jake, the guy's name is Jake, what he came up with.
Yeah. Did you happen to have any, like, marks on your arm or anything where it grabbed you?
No, but I also didn't look, and it was the middle of the night. I don't think so. I feel like I would have maybe felt bruisey or something, and I don't remember feeling bruisey or anything like that, like the next day. So I don't think so. But again, I didn't look.
Yeah, I mean, and that doesn't necessarily. I've again, people have had these would seem to be very out of body experiences, and they wake up with bruises to correlate, with these experiences in their body. So whether you did or didn't doesn't mean anything either way necessarily. Although, if you didn't, I would put that, maybe more of a check in the out of body category,
Well, the flip side to that is I do not bruise very easily. I've been kicked in the face before, and I got a little bit of a fat lip, but there wasn't a single bruise on me. Like, I very rarely bruise.
Okay.
So there's that flip side as well. Like, I might get the pink skin that you get briefly afterwards, but an actual bruise, the vasculature breaking doesn't typically happen with me. Okay, to continue on. So in our family, just kind of becomes another one of our weird stories that we periodically talk about, and I periodically ask my mom if she's seen the thing, and usually she won't want to talk about it too much, but sometimes just say, yeah, I saw it down at the end of the hallway. It was kind of just lurking there, and it just watches sometimes and freaks me out, and I just ignore it. Right? So that's for a couple of years. So fast forward to last year, around July, right? So around July last year, 2023, I'm talking to my mom on the phone, and she tells me this story. So she'd gone to bed, and when she'd gone to sleep, she had been upset at something when she fell asleep. Like something was upsetting her. I don't know if it's family issues or what, like, but she fell asleep upset. And by this point, one of my brothers lives with them. He's downstairs somewhere in like kind of a mother-in-law suite outside in the backyard. And then his daughter, my niece, is there, and she stays in the house with my parents. And so my mom, she wakes up in bed and she feels what she thinks is her granddaughter, my niece, like between her and my pops, and kind of is like squeezing my mom with her arm thrown around my mom's throat and her leg thrown over my mom's like legs or stomach. And that's kind of like the usual way my niece, when she would sneak into my mom's room in the middle of the night because she was scared of something. If she would sneak in, she would go in between them, lock her arm and leg around my mom, and just hold on tight. Mm-hmm. And usually, if she was the more scared she was of something, the tighter she'd like kind of hold on. So my mom wakes up feeling an arm and a leg thrown over her neck and some other lower part of her body, and she's kind of squeezing her hard. And so my mom kind of tries to quietly tell my niece, like, hey baby, you're squeezing too hard, like you need to relax, you're squeezing me too hard. And then my niece started squeezing a little bit harder, and then started kind of wrapping around to the top of my mom, like on top of her. And my mom very quickly realizes this is not my niece, it's too big to be my niece, and it's kind of just laying on top of her. And this doesn't go anywhere like sexual assault, thank God. But basically this thing had got into bed with them and pretended to be my niece. And then when my mom woke up, it kind of like crawled, like kind of shifted from in between them up on top of her body and was laying on top of her at this point. And my mom, who's normally just like scared senseless of most of this stuff and would be more likely to cry and pray and hope that it goes away than do anything else, for once in her life, thank God, she gets pissed off because it made her think it was her granddaughter, and she actually gets pissed off about it. And so somehow she knows that this thing can hear her thoughts, and she kind of mentally growls at it to like, get off, yarn a lot of my room. Because typically this thing, when it come into her bedroom, it'd be in the hallways or the guest room, or sometimes we think it might be down in my pops' office or whatever. But it wouldn't typically go in their bedroom. And my mom's idea with that is because my pops is very, very strong, active in their church, like praise and worship team, friends with multiple pastors, like they're very involved with what they do. And he doesn't talk about things. He normally pretends things aren't there, but he prays things all the time. And my mom kind of sees him as like a protection, a protector. And she doesn't typically think that anything could go into her room because he's there. Mm-hmm. But this time it did. So she's pissed off, and she tells it, get off, yarn out of my room. And then it started like chittering at her. I have this written down from when I first was talking about it. So she said it was like a weird insect noises mixed with like scraping sandpaper. So like a combination of insect kind of chattering with sandpaper scraping. Those kind of noises together was the noise it was making at her. Wow. As she started to turn to like, get off me, yarn a lot in the room. And so she did that. It starts like doing this weird chittering, chattering, whatever noise at her. Pops isn't waking up. And so she gets a little more forceful and angry and says, I'm going to wake him up, like wake up my pops. Like, I'm going to wake him up if you do not get off me right now and get out. And so eventually, like, it kind of retreats off of her down onto the floor and goes over by the bedroom door that goes out to that hallway upstairs. But it doesn't leave yet. And it keeps like chittering at her, like it's trying to communicate with her somehow. They're kind of going back and forth. My mom's like, she'd probably want to say the F word. Well, maybe she would. You never know. But she's like, get the F out. And she tries to pretend that she's an angel, but she's got a potty mouth like me. But she's like, get the F out.
Hey, in that situation, the best of us might drop an F-bomb.
Yeah, I'm trying to be careful myself. I was a sailor, so like I'm trying to maintain my language so you don't have to bleep me too much. Because I know you love to bleep us.
I find it hilarious. Like,
I know.
I do that for my own humor. Most of the time, I could just cut them out and it would be fine. But I think it's funnier to bleep. I always thought it was funny when I was a kid. I'd watch, movies on TV. They would bleep it out. I thought for some reason I found it very funny. So that's why I do that. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I know. I've heard you say that before. I gotta tell you. But so she's like, get the F out, whatever, and it's like kind of almost like it's an argument. It's just chittering back at her from over by the bedroom door. So finally she goes and starts shaking awake my pops. And when she grabs him and starts shaking him, it finally kind of just disappears through the closed door out into the hallway. So it's not like it opens the door, it just goes through the door.
So this whole time she could, not only did she feel it, but she could see this thing.
Yeah, she could see it, and she was convinced he could hear what her thoughts were. I don't think she was talking out loud. She was like talking in her head at it, yelling at it in her head.
Mm-hmm.
Because at first she didn't want to wake up my pops.
Right.
Because I love him, but he's not always the most supportive with this stuff. He's like, oh, just pray. It'll be fine. Like, you just aren't praying hard enough, which he tries to be supportive in his way based on the way his belief system works.
Right.
But he tries, but it's the whole thing, like in their pastor, where they think that if you're praying and something's not working, then you must be inviting it somehow, which I don't agree with. I think that's kind of like a victim blaming scenario in certain cases. Yeah. So after a bit of back and forth, she starts shaking awake my pops, and it goes through the door. The door, it doesn't open the door or anything. It just goes through it out into the hallway. And so he kind of like halfway, whatever, like kind of halfway wakes up, and she tells him it's fine, go back to sleep, and it doesn't come back in. And she's talking to me about this, and she's like very confused by the possible communication attempt. And at first she's talking to me, she's like, I wonder if in some like kind of twisted way, it was trying to comfort me because I was upset when I went to bed. And I'm like, no, Mom, it's like, I don't believe that for a second. Like, I think it wanted to scare you and feed off of your fear, like a lot of these things that are like this tend to do. And it just got surprised that you got pissed for once. Mm-hmm. And when I had the experience with that thing during my not dream, like, it was not nice. So I don't believe for a second that it was just going to comfort her.
Right.
Yeah, I think it wanted a fear reaction, and maybe thought she was vulnerable because she went to bed asleep, and decided it was going to like take advantage of those emotions, get some feed off of some fear or whatever, and she got pissed instead. And so it goes out, leaves the room, and I tell her, like, yeah, I don't believe it was comforting you. I think it was just luck of the draw. You got mad this time. And as I always do, I always try and encourage her to be more confrontational and less fearful when things mess with her, because she's normally more likely to be fearful. And I'm like, no, stand up, tell it to get the F out, or be angry with it, be stern with it, like you would a child if it was like really doing something wrong. Like, be angry, like, because that they seem to respond between that and certain prayers and stuff, no matter what culture, and that's what they kind of respond to sometimes, it seems like. So we're having that conversation and we're continuing to talk, and she at that point tells me that she hasn't been using her quilting room much, and the quilting room is what the guest room around that U-turn of that wall that it was trying to pull me around. So the guest room at the end of that little hallway has at that point been turned into her quilting room. She likes making big sewn quilts and stuff. And she tells me she hasn't been using the quilting room much lately because it will sit in that hallway outside the quilting room, the guest room, where I experienced it, and it will just sit there and it will just kind of watch her and like kind of just loom out there watching her whenever she goes into that room. And so it's kind of like it began to intimidate her, and so she stopped going there because she didn't like this thing sitting out there in the hallway watching her.
In any of these experiences, including the one where it climbed onto her bed, is she still describing this as predator looking, or is she getting a clearer look at this thing?
I don't know about that one specifically, but there are sometimes where she says occasionally she sees it more clearly, and sometimes it's more the predator thing. So I don't know that specific instance if that's what it was doing, but there are times since I had talked to her about my not dream that she like, yeah, I've seen it.
Okay.
It's entirely possible she'd saw it once or twice even before I told her about that. It's just that initial story she was telling me when she very first saw it was cloaked like that, and I think it typically is, but my mom is one of those people that sees through things, even though she doesn't want to. So I'm sure she probably periodically saw it, and I know she did at least later.
And the description pretty much matches the one you gave of the thing in your dream.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. She always calls it the spider thing. She doesn't call it a rake or a pale crawler. She calls it the spider thing just because of the way the limbs are and the way it moves and stuff. The way it crawled up the fireplace. That's her name for it, the spider thing. Right. So she tells me she hasn't been in there because it keeps just sitting out in the hallway staring at her and creeping around and stuff. And I guess my little niece noticed that my mom hasn't gone up there to do her quilting, because usually when mom would go up there and do quilting, my niece would go up there and she'd like do drawings or coloring or whatever. She'd do some sort of kind of crafty stuff in the room with my mom. And she noticed that mom wasn't going up there, and she asked my mom why she wasn't going up there. And my mom made up an excuse because my niece is a little girl. And my niece said, no, it's because of the monster that lives in the hallway there and likes to watch you.
Oh, wow.
My niece said that to my mom.
Wow.
And my mom just immediately denied, like, no, that's not true, honey. There's nothing wrong. I just haven't been feeling like doing it. And my niece was just very insistent, like, no, it's because of the monster that sits in the hallway and likes to watch you while we're in here. And so it makes me think my niece has seen it more, but it's not something I'm allowed to ask her about. Plus she's like 7 at this point.
Yeah, you don't want to scare her.
Yeah, it's like I
Yeah.
would wait till she's like a teenager or something
Yeah,
before I
yeah.
ask her a little bit about that stuff. And she's not talking to me about it, so I don't have a place to be prodding her with any questions.
I would say that's prudent. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's last July, that conversation with my mom in July 2023, right? And then so at that point, it kind of seems to me like it's ramping up. Like she's going to her space, and that's another thing, the craft room, that's where she kind of does, like, that's her current version of art. And a lot of these stories, these things seem to be attracted to artists or people who are doing art, whether it's painting or drawing or whatever. Like, they seem to be attracted to the spaces where the creation happens, and creative people get messed with more, and usually in the spaces where they do the creating.
I talked to someone about this on Tuesday night. It'll be on an upcoming show. It's a creative space is a very liminal space. I think if you really get into the creating, it is very akin to a form of meditation. I think I've done it with drawing, where you just kind of like, I say you get into the zone, and sometimes
it's just like a sports athlete getting into the zone.
Yeah.
Like, it's the same thing.
Yeah, hours will pass, and you'll like look up and like, oh my goodness, And same with music. Sometimes you can just kind of get into this place where you just kind of lock in, and I think it's a very liminal space. Yeah, absolutely.
And then even all the face stories, all the historical face stories, they're attracted to musicians and artists and things like that. Like, those are the people they're attracted to. And it's something like, I'm not the only one who's noticed. Lots of people have noticed this, that the whole thing where people who have a ton of experiences, usually you can say, did you go through some sort of trauma as a child? And are you an artist? And usually the answer to both of those is yes, more often than not. With people who just are like repeat experiencers their entire life constantly. Like, those are very common denominators. So this thing's ramping up. It's kind of intimidated her out of her creative space at this point. She doesn't go up there very often. And so a couple more months go by, and we get to October, this past October. And in October, I'm talking to my mom, and she a lot of times doesn't like to even admit to me some of the things that are going on, just because the combination of her being self-conscious about it and the fact that she's always worried that I'm interested in the paranormal stuff, because she's worried that it's going to lead me down a dark path.
Right, yeah.
Just the way her belief system works. So she is sometimes hesitant to talk about it because she knows my interest and is worried about my interest. But she finally in October decides to tell me that she can't really go into her sewing room at all now, because if she goes into her sewing room, she'll like get inexplicable like scratches and cuts on her arms and on her body in different places, and they've actually like bled a tiny bit. And then a week before this conversation happened, so like we were talking in late October, she says, so a week ago, and she had told my pops this a little bit, but he was like, oh, you're bumping into stuff or whatever, you hit something in the kitchen. And so a week before this conversation in October, my pops is in his office in the upstairs, the other way down the hallway. Instead of hooking the U-turn, you go down towards the bathroom, and his office is there. And his office is always creepy at night too. I always close his door whenever I go up there, and his door is open at night. I just close the door if it's dark in there. So she goes there. Sometimes it's during the day, and she's bringing him like food or drinks or something like that, like she'll dote on him and like keep him happy while he's working with like food and drink. She likes to make him happy that way. And so like acts of service type thing. And so she's going up there and they're in his office. She's giving him the food and drink. And in his plain sight, like he sees this time for the first time ever, he sees this. They watch 3 scratches open up on her forearm, bloody scratches open up out of nowhere on her forearm. And they're bleeding enough to where they have to grab some napkins to hold against it so she doesn't drip blood on the floor.
Wow.
So it's not just like the raised welts you sometimes see in paranormal TV. It's like they have to prevent the blood from dripping on the floor.
Wow.
Right. So at this point, things are violent. That's how I would describe it. And she's telling me this, and I've talked to her about like what she's done with like her pastor or whatever, and she's like, Rich has been praying nonstop and it doesn't stop. And Rich is my pops. And she's says like, talk to the pastor, and the pastor has prayed for us, but it keeps happening. And so the pastor kind of goes, which some church groups do, where they say, well, if it's not working, you must be inviting it in. You must be letting this into your life somehow. And he switches to the whole like victim blaming mentality that a lot of churches have. Mm-hmm. So the church isn't helping. Her pastor's not helping. He's basically making her think she must be doing something wrong. And she's not. They're very, very devout in their beliefs. Mm-hmm. Like she likes horror movies, but she won't even watch horror movies with me the last few years just because she's worried about that doing anything.
Right. Yeah.
And they're not going to bring in a Catholic priest because they're very much Protestant, and they kind of have that mistaken impression that Catholics are actually like praying directly to Mary and the saints, right, like they're gods, when it's more of an intercession. Like, hey, can you like kind of intercede for me on my behalf to the Father? Right. She doesn't understand that, which I didn't understand that most of my life growing up. A lot of Protestants don't understand that.
Yeah, I mean, it's what they're taught, you know? You
exactly.
know what you're taught, you know? Yeah.
And so she's not going to bring in a Catholic priest because she doesn't want them praying to the saints or whatever. And so they know me, of course. And so I managed to convince them to let me do something. I had something bothering my son when he was like 1 year old for a period of like 8 or 9 months. And after prayers not working all that time and confrontation not working all that time, I had finally gone ahead and bought a smudge bundle with cedar in it and some type of sage. It's not white sage because I try and avoid white sage because it's basically going practically extinct with everyone over harvesting it, and native people who use it ceremonially can't get a hold of it a lot of the time. So I try and avoid that. But I get some other type of sage and cedar, which is more for clearing out bad things, the cedar, from what I understand. I get a bundle, a smudge bundle for that from some like indigenous owned website, so that hopefully the stuff's being collected properly. And then my wife, being from the Hispanic Catholic family, one of her sisters mailed us some exorcism salt and little vial of holy water, like blessed by like some Catholic person, some Catholic priest who would bless exorcism salt, I guess. And so they mailed that to us, and after 8 or 9 months of whatever was messing with my son, messing with him, when I finally brought in the salt and the sage and cedar smudge bundle, the moment I brought the cedar into the house and brought it into the bedroom where the thing kept on bothering him, all activity stopped. I never even had to light the dang thing. Like, it's just like bringing it into the room was kind of finally like, oh, he's serious, so I'll stop now. And then my son was never messed with again. So in that house, I never actually ended up using it. And so I like talked to Mom, like, the prayers by themselves aren't working. Let me do the kind of do everything all at once type thing that I was going to do at my house, where I combine your Protestant-friendly prayers with some Catholic exorcism salt and a cedar smudge and all that. Just do it all together and just cover as many bases from as many different practices that I know of in my limited capacity, and just do it all together and let me have a go at kicking this thing out. She talked to my pops, and he was very apprehensive, but the only reason that he finally said, okay, you can come do that, is because he watched those cuts open up on her arm in front of him, and he couldn't really deny that anymore. And so about another week after that or so is when I'm gonna do that, because we're going down for a funeral for my grandmother. And so after we got back from the funeral, I was gonna stop by their place and we're gonna spend the night. And then the next morning, I was gonna do everything I could. And in the meantime, I reached out to both your Discord and Shannon's Discord. I'm like, hey, I'm doing a thing. If anyone has any ideas of anything that would help, or if you think I should do the smudge in a certain way, or if you have specific prayers or different things that you think I should like incorporate in this, I'm kind of like just all hands on deck. Anyone who has an idea, throw it at me. And if I think I can incorporate it, I will. I'll just do everything I can as much as I can. And so I got good things like Brother Richard suggested, and that's part of the other reason why she was kind of open to this, because I've sent her a few of your talks with Brother Richard, and she really, really likes him. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that he sent me a couple of ideas, like, kind of helped it make it okay for her. I had to like promise not to invoke any pagan deities or anything, which I wasn't going to do anyways, because it would be disrespectful to them and their home.
Right.
And so he gives me a few like scripture reading ideas and a prayer. Another person on the other Discord has some prayers from supposedly a Catholic exorcist friend of his, and he kind of picked through and like did the ones that don't really invoke Mary or the saints. Mm-hmm. They just focus on the Father and the Son, mm-hmm. and the angels or whatever. And he sends those my way with like 4 different things, like do it in this order. And Brother Richard like do these readings. And I had another friend she runs one of those kind of new agey spiritual kind of shops where they do all the different like things like Reiki and different things like that. And she's kind of got that whole psychic medium thing going on. And so she was giving me ideas too. So basically there's like, started with her saying, start on the outside, do like your salt or whatever around the whole perimeter of the home first, to kind of put up a barrier so that while you're cleaning the inside of the house, there's nothing else trying to push in. I'm like, sure, that makes sense. Fine, I'll do that. And then so I did that, and then went in the house. And so at this point, all that's home it's my mom is there, my pops is at work, and then me, my wife, and at this point, my 4-year-old. He just turned 5 recently, but at this point he's 4. So that's all that's in the house. Mom, wife, 4-year-old, and me. And so I start off like, okay, well, I'll do the outside thing first, since she's the only one who suggested doing something like that first, like some sort of order with that besides just prayers or whatever. And so I did that first, and I go outside and I start walking the perimeter, just kind of have this baggie of like the exorcism salt and just doing my own version of prayers and things like that while I'm going around the place. And then so my mom and wife and kid are in the living room downstairs inside the house while I'm outside. And they're in there, and then they see me go up to the top of the stairs inside the house, up to the landing and that balcony that's above them, and then turn down one of the halls. And a little bit after that, they start hearing all this kind of banging around upstairs, like things falling, cupboards slamming, things like that. And they kind of like my mom and wife look at each other like, what's going on? And my wife says, oh, it must be Randy. I saw him go up there down that hallway. And my mom is confused because she thought she saw me go into her bedroom, but she says, oh, okay. And then they turn and they look at in the living room, like hanging out like on that fireplace now. They have a giant ass television screen. And because of some issues with an ex-husband, my parents have security cameras all around the outside of the house, and they like to just say, if they're not watching television or something, which they don't do that often, they typically will just leave those security feeds up on that television screen running, like the different like 8 or 9 different screens, whatever it is, mm-hmm. so they can see outside at any time. So they hear the banging around upstairs. They're like, oh, it must be Randy. I saw him at the top of the landing go down the hallway. I don't know why he's banging around. They say that, look at the screen, and they see that I'm still outside, walking the perimeter of the house.
Wow.
And just another aside, that's not the first time someone has seen something that looks like my doppelganger doing something it shouldn't be doing. That's another story. So they get immediately freaked out, and I'm outside for maybe 20, 25 minutes total. And I finally come in and they're just looking very spooked at me. I'm like, what's going on, guys? And my mom says, well, you got its attention. I'm like, okay. And so at that point, send my wife and kid outside. And before I send my mom out, like there was some scripture readings that Brother Richard suggested I do with her first. Well, he suggested I do it with my pops since he's kind of the head of the household, but he was at work. So I did it with my mom. And the whole time we're doing these readings with my mom, and we're just downstairs in that living room, and we're just reading the suggested scriptures, and she's like kind of trembling, full body shivering a little bit, is very freaked out. And we get through that, and she goes outside, and then I go upstairs and kind of start in the craft room where everything has happened, and I just go top to bottom, every room of the house, every cupboard. Yeah, that before I did, I opened every cupboard, every drawer, under every bed, every closet, every window, whatever that I could get to. And starting at the top, working around the upstairs, and finally around downstairs and all that. And I just go all the way through, and I start with some prayer stuff. Then I go around and I smudge everything. Then I go around and because we didn't have any holy water with us at that time, so we just prayed over the water ourselves. Well, we figured we'll be Protestants and pray over it ourselves. And so did that, and then was putting like little crosses on all the windows just with water that we prayed over ourselves. Went through the whole house doing everything, closing everything up as I went down, and then got down to the bottom of the house until we got to the last door to the backyard where they were, and called her in for one last little reading and prayer suggested by Brother Richard again. And then closed that last door, and she thought that it felt much nicer in there, and she was finally relaxing and everything. And we're like, she says it feels like it worked. We're like, okay. And so since then it's like, well, let's see what's happening. So we had that conversation where she told me about everything going on late October. It was a very early November that I actually did that. I think it was like November 3rd-ish. Oh, the other thing I did, I forgot this, and thank you to everyone who remembers this, both on your Discord and Shannon's Discord. I told everyone like when I was going to be doing this, because I kind of talked about this a little bit. I talked about what happened to my mom in October with the bleeding and the cuts and stuff. When I asked for advice, I said, once I knew the time, like, I'm going to be doing it at this time. If anyone wants to pray while I'm doing it, like, or do whatever prayers you want to whoever you pray to. Doesn't really matter to me. But if anyone wants to lend their support from a distance, go for it. Like, I made sure that Brother Richard knew what time it would be in Ireland, and I had another friend somewhere else in England, made sure she knew what time it would be her time. And basically anyone who was willing kind of contributed that day around the time I was doing all that praying or doing whatever they were going to do to help. That was just my whole, like, we'll do everything we possibly can. And it seems to have worked. And she told me probably later that same day when I was talking to her, maybe the next week, I was talking to her, just checking in with her and see how everything was going. And she told me that when we were reading those scriptures downstairs after I had kicked my wife and kid out, and she was doing she was trembling and like very fearful and all this stuff, kind of freaking out a little bit. She said that the whole time we were doing that the spider thing was just up there looming over that banister down at us, just leering down at us, like looking really pissed off.
Oh, wow.
And it was just up there, and that's why she was like squirming so much, because it was just there and she was just trying to ignore it. And she said it looked pissed, it seemed pissed. I didn't see it when that was happening, but she was visibly trembling. I saw all that. That was, for the most part, it. There was a few things that happened around it, like the one lady who's in the UK, she actually apparently accidentally tapped into this. She's another, like, one of those kind of like super experiencer type people, and she thinks that she might have accidentally done some sort of like remote viewing thing, because that evening or the next day or something, she kind of cautiously asked me about something, and basically she told me that about 20 minutes past the time I told everyone who wants to start praying and do whatever they're going to do, which the timing works out, about 20 minutes after I asked everyone to start, she was sitting in her house, I believe, working, and all of a sudden she just got this image of this thing, and she described the spider, pale crawler, whatever thing, just like my mom and I did, leering over a balcony, looking down at something, not looking at her, but looking down at something, and scared the poo out of her. And so she kind of very cautiously asked me if there was anything like that happened. Like, oh yeah, that's what my mom says happened. That's what she says she saw.
Oh, wow.
So the lady in the UK saw the same thing.
Wow.
My wife and mom saw the weird doppelganger thing of me when I was still outside. And then whatever it was, oh, that was the other thing with the doppelganger thing. They didn't figure this out till later, but they both saw, quote unquote, me go in different directions. So they both saw me arrive at the top of the landing. But one of them, I believe my wife saw me go back down towards that crafting room. And then my mom thought that I had gone into her bedroom, which is the other way.
Huh.
So they saw me go in different directions.
Wow.
And yeah, it was just bizarre. And then
Yeah.
there's one cool thing after that where I was talking to her maybe 2 weeks after I did all this. And she said, she's like, it's the weird, like, asked her how everything's going. She's like, it's so nice. It's so happy. I've been using my crafting room. Violet's been up there with me, like my niece. Like, she hasn't been scared. Like, everything's been feeling nice and warm and happy. And I haven't seen anything in the house, and everything just feels wonderful. And there's one weird thing that's happening, but it's not dark. It seems warm and good. I'm like, well, what is it? And she says, well, you know those old movies where people in the church used to wear those like brown robes and stuff like that, right? I'm like, yeah. And she's like, I keep sometimes at night thinking I see someone in the hallway upstairs just kind of slowly walking back and forth with a book in their hand and their head bowed like they're praying, the hood over their head.
Wow.
But it's so weird because, well, I mean, that's like old day stuff. They don't do that anymore. I'm like, they kind of do. I'm pretty sure
Yeah,
that's
they
exactly
do.
how people like Brother Richard do. So I asked her a little bit more about it, and the only thing that doesn't work for maybe Brother Richard is the fact that she said she didn't see a beard.
Right.
And so she didn't see a beard. I'm like, I don't know if they all have beards or not, but basically she described a monk in the brown robes with the cowl thrown up, slowly walking back and forth upstairs for a couple of weeks. It only lasted a couple of weeks, sometimes at night, with a book in his hand, head bowed, like kind of
Wow.
very quietly muttering prayers. And she didn't even know people still did that. So it's like, it makes me wonder, was there someone else in because Brother Richard said he was going to mention it to people in whatever the place is that it's called that he operates out of. So I don't know if there's someone
Friaries
in
and
there
stuff,
and
yeah.
that doesn't have a beard, or maybe there's someone that interceded, that they asked to intercede in the past that didn't have a beard, or maybe she just didn't notice a beard. I don't know, but basically she saw a Catholic monk in the brown robes up there praying, and it felt warm and light and made her feel comfortable. And that lasted for maybe 3 or so weeks after we did all this, where she would occasionally see that at nighttime.
Wow. That gave me chills. That was,
Yeah.
wow.
And I have to tell Brother Richard that, I don't think. But I've only ever chatted with him on the Discord. It's not like I've talked to him on the phone.
I think he'd love to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've thought about it, but I was like, how do I bring this up? This is kind of a weird thing to bring up to him when we've never even talked on the phone. But there we go. He'll hear this probably.
Yeah, I'll make sure to point it out to him. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow,
But the
wow,
only
wow.
thing is, there was no beard.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's, it could have been,
Yeah.
someone related. That is, overall, such a cool story. It's like really amazing. That last part just gave me chills because it seems like maybe something bad was replaced with something good, at least temporarily. Or like I'm thinking, was this some kind of intercession where it was like sort of completing the exorcism for you,
Yeah, yeah. It could be multiple things. It could be one of those things where maybe one of the friars, like whether that Brother Richard works with, whether it's him or one of the people he works with, somehow one of those weird things is happening where they were like praying really hard and the image of them kind of got projected in there. Or it could have been maybe someone that one of their saints that they asked to intercede on their behalf, maybe one of them
Right.
showed up and actually did something.
Wow.
And part of the things I was praying and going through was I was doing less focusing on the dark and evil and more focusing on fill this home with love and light and joy. And if there's anything that is incompatible with that love and light and joy, like boot it out. If it's incompatible with that, then it cannot be here. Kick it out. It cannot return, whatever. And so the only thing that ended up showing up in that house, inside the house, after we did all of that was for 2 or 3 weeks, she would periodically see someone in those brown robes, and they felt wonderful and loving, and like it was a good thing, even though it confused her. She thought it was a good thing.
That's beautiful. That's really, really beautiful. The other thing I like about this is I love that there was the Strange Familiars Discord involved, but I also love that it was the Strange Familiars Discord and the Into the Fray Discord. We're friends with Into the Fray, and that we're all kind of together, like pulling for this. It's such a cool use of the Discord. I think it's awesome. Like the whole thing is just so like ends up being a really, really cool story from a very, very spooky kind of creepy thing to just this really, really nice outcome. I'm thrilled by the story. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty cool. I mean, that was kind of my thought. Was like, if I don't know any fellow weirdos like this in person, besides like my family, most of them are afraid of this. Who do I know who's open to like weird stuff like this? I know the people on the Discord server, like as much as I can know you guys without ever meeting you in person. But that's who I talk to, so that's who I'm gonna pull. Like, might as well all hands on deck. Anyone who wants to join in, go for it. And
that prayer and intention section in Discord, I'm telling you, some good stuff has come out of that. The fact that, you know, I just keep going back to Indiana and what I asked for with the witch diggers and got it to the letter. It's
within like a week or two, right?
Yeah. It's stunning, and other people have had good stuff come out of that too. So it's just a wonderful thing, and I'm happy for it to be used for these purposes. So it's just all around like what a great story. Thank you so much for sharing it.
You're welcome. Like it. I'm happy to share it. You were saying you wanted more pale crawler things, so that's the closest I got. It wasn't running around the woods, but it was in the house, walking through walls and stuff, being a weirdo.
We're going to count it, and I think you know what's coming next. On the morning of April 18th, 1961, Joe Simonton saw a silver disc on his farm. He went out, investigated, and stepped aboard the craft. There he encountered 3 dark-skinned humanoids who handed him an empty jug. Joe filled it with water and brought it back for them. In return, they gave him some pancakes. Randy, would you eat the pancakes?
So this is a little bit weird for me, because if you asked me this maybe a year and a half to 2 years ago, absolutely effing yes. In a heartbeat, I would absolutely eat those pancakes. My time in the military, I went in lots of places around the world, and I tried every weird thing I could besides raw stuff, like raw meat or whatever.
Right.
So absolutely, until then, the only reason that I have paused in this last like year and a half, 2 years is over this time, I've learned more about the Fae stuff and the Fae stories, and I'm kind of on that alien boat where it seems like a lot of the alien Fae stuff is kind of connected. So that's the only thing that would give me pause at this point. Like, am I making a mistake by accepting food from something that might be Fae?
Right, yeah.
So before knowing that, before like 2 years ago, absolutely I would have. Now I would have pause, and I would have to make myself resist doing it, and it would be a temptation, but I think I would resist just because of what I've read and heard since then. Because I've listened to all of Barbara's stuff too.
Yeah.
Before she shuttered hers, but yeah.
Well,
that's why I found you, was through Barbara.
Yeah. Barb's great.
Yeah, she is.
All right. Thank you so much, Randy. Once again, I'm thrilled for the story. Thanks so much for sharing it. Strange Familiars is brought to you by our patrons. We could not and would not do the show without our patrons. Thank you so much, patrons. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for your help and your support, no matter where you're supporting us. If you like Strange Familiars and you'd like to help us out and get extra content besides, you can become a patron at Patreon. It's patreon.com/strangefamiliars. All of our patrons get commercial-free versions of the weekly show, as well as bonus episodes. We do at least one full extra episode of Strange Familiars every month just for our patrons. Sometimes we do more. Once again, it's patreon.com/strangefamiliars. You can also find a program at Apple Podcasts. It's called Patron of the Strange, and our supporters on Apple Podcasts also get the commercial-free weekly episodes and the bonus episodes monthly. Just a note, if you're thinking about signing up and becoming a patron, we might be raising the rate for the entry level. It might go from $4 to $5. But if you get in now at $4,
it's forever.
You're grandfathered in. We always keep that. There are people who, when we started the podcast, it was $3. There are people who got in at $3, and we've kept them at $3. They still get the content. They'll never be charged more than that on Patreon, as long as Patreon keeps allowing us to do it that way. that's going to be our policy. So we might raise that entry level from $4 to $5, but if you get in now at $4, you're there. It'll be $4. If you've been thinking about it, now's a good time to do it. We're not sure we're raising those rates, but we've been discussing it. The price of everything is going up. We might just have to raise them a little bit. But, it's a good time to jump in. Jump in now and you'll be there. And as long as Patreon allows us to keep those old tiers open, that's all you'll be charged for as long as you stay signed up. So again, it's patreon.com/strangefamiliars. So next, Brother Richard is going to do some commentary on Randy's story. We're going to talk about some general ideas when people have entities in their house, as well as Randy's story specifically. I'd like to welcome Brother Richard back to Strange Familiars. How you doing?
Hi, Tim. It's good to be with you.
It's always great to have you back. And tonight is a sort of pointed commentary. After I talked to Randy and he invoked your name, I thought maybe we should have Brother Richard talk about this, especially given the sort of revelations at the end of his interview.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, let's start with, do you often get approached from people outside of Catholicism for help with this stuff?
Yeah, from time to time. I think for a while there was a meme going around saying, everybody's a Catholic when they're in need of an exorcist. And it was just one of those kind of funny horror movie memes. But I suppose it does happen. People will get in touch. They might believe in other traditions. They might believe in nothing at all. But, the old saying goes, there are no atheists in the trenches. And when you're up against some of this kind of stuff, naturally you reach out to whoever or whatever you think might help. I suppose when we're generally encountering people like that, we kind of say to them, look, we're not kind of exterminators. You don't just call us in and we do the job and everything returns. Normally we would see kind of visitations of these kinds as in some way inviting people into a deeper relationship with the divine. They're reminders to us that we live in a vastly more complicated and more mysterious than our day-to-day reality very often shows. And so for a lot of people, these can be doorway moments, not necessarily into becoming Catholic, where we don't use them for proselytism or conversion of people outside the faith, but they can certainly be moments when people get to ask deeper and bigger questions, existential questions, or even familiars people would call them the woo questions. They begin to be asked, if you've got something in the house that you didn't bring in, or something that's beginning to affect you either positively or negatively, but in an unusual way, people will reach out no matter who they are.
Randy seemed to have this combination of, he seemed so desperate that he sort of started applying what I would call like the shotgun effect. He was burning sage and he was saying whatever prayers he could, and sure. Let's call it a multidisciplinary approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes that works very well. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult, particularly if, and I'm not speaking of Randy's case in this situation, but particularly if you're borrowing practices that come from traditions or faiths other than your own. That can be difficult, particularly if you're dealing with not necessarily the diabolical or the demonic, but if you're dealing with things like ancestral spirits or spirits of the land that you're in. They can take grave offense at times to being called out in the words or rituals of other traditions. So you need to be careful about that. You need to know what you're doing if you're going to bring in the multidisciplinary approach or the more eclectic approach to these things. And I think a lot of people nowadays tend to borrow practices from different religions, different traditions, even just in terms of prayer or meditation or spirituality. And that's fine. There can be the sort of building of a useful toolkit. But the difficulty is if you're applying a kind of a one-size-fits-all syncretism, and you sort of think that all of these things go by the one name, or it's one thing that goes by many names. Often in moments of kind of spiritual encounter like that, they will let you know very, very quickly, very clearly, whether or not you have the right to use the rituals or the tools that you have perhaps borrowed from somewhere else.
Interesting.
Yeah, it can happen.
I'm somewhat reminded of the story you told, I forget which episode, a while back, about the person who had the idol, I believe, from Africa.
Oh, yeah, the African statues. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in that sense, it was more a case of being a sort of a diplomatic presence between between two traditions, and sort of from our own tradition, recognizing that what we had was some kind of connection to ancestral spirits of that particular tribe, that particular group that seemed to have been, I don't mean in a kind of a slavery sense, but spiritually bound to these objects, and were determined that they were going to, that we determined that they needed to go back and needed to be reunited with the culture from which they had come. And that was a fascinating one, because various elements appeared from the African tradition as we were doing this, but presented in a kind of a modern way. So we had that really interesting thing of two African children turning up just before the ceremony, who were dressed in, it was late 20th century then, late 20th century clothes, and looked to all intents and purposes like two normal physical African children, but they appeared from nowhere and disappeared as a way of sort of announcing that, you know, there was a presence here that was being mediated in a very real way. So we knew very, very quickly that what was being brought to us to deal with that day was absolutely real. This was no kind of myth or figment of that family's imagination, and it put us in a place where we knew to act with real deliberation and with real diplomacy, spiritual diplomacy, as it were, when encountering their tradition from our own.
Well, it sounds like with Randy, you were kind enough to give him some prayers that they would be comfortable as Protestants using in this situation. Yeah,
and that happens a lot, you know. Yeah, our brothers and sisters from other denominations or even other traditions will come, and they might say, you know, like, we want help or we want assistance, but these are the boundaries that we don't necessarily want to cross ourselves because of the tradition we belong to, and that's absolutely fine. We can help people in many ways, in other ways. I mean, just to give you an example, outside of the whole area of deliverance and exorcism and all of that kind of stuff, some years ago, there was a couple who got in touch with me. They wanted to get married. She was Catholic and wanted to get married in the Catholic Church with the Catholic ceremony. He described himself as a neo-pagan. He was originally from a Catholic background, but had left the faith and had found meaning, spirituality, etc., in the neo-pagan tradition. So his compromise to getting married in a Catholic church was he was insisting that a Franciscan would do it, because he felt that we had a kind of a connection to nature, implicit connection to nature. So I met with the couple, lovely couple, and they were happy to get married in the church, and we were planning the wedding, and he said to me he wanted elements of his tradition present within the ceremony. So I said, well, what are you looking for? And what he was looking for was the invocation of the four elements as part of a blessing at the start. And I said, well, you know, we actually do that already within the tradition. And he was totally taken aback. I was saying, yeah, he'd never seen it. Well, I said, you know, the consecration of earth is, for us, is the consecration of the space, the church itself, the stone altar. The consecration of air is done with incense, and we'll incense both of you and incense the congregation as well, as sanctified as people of God. Water, we have a ceremony of water that we use in terms of sprinkling and sprinkling with holy water. And the fire symbolism was the symbolism of the marriage candles. So once I put that to him, he was perfectly happy to have all of those, and felt that his own tradition was being represented in that way. And we went and we had the wedding, and we did all of the bits and pieces, and he was perfectly happy and received it all. And it came to the sprinkling of holy water, and I went to the Catholic party, the lady, to sprinkle her, and she whispered urgently to me, please don't sprinkle me. The dress is silk. She was terrified that the dress would be stained with water. So, yeah, I mean, you know, you work within the boundaries that the people set for you. And I think in Randy's case, I'm not trying to speak for him. Obviously, people will have heard the whole thing. But his family's background was Protestant. And so they didn't want anything that would include invocation of Mary or the saints or whatever, while there was still an invitation from Randy for anyone who could help, anyone out there. I think it came through the Discord first originally. You know, he was asking for help and prayer from everybody out there in all of their various lineages and traditions. But when it came to actually elements that he could use with his parents, he was very clear that obviously their own spirituality had to be respected, as indeed we would. So what I sent him were prayers and scripture recitations that would be very clear for anybody who was coming from a Christian but a Protestant denomination, and wouldn't make them uncomfortable through invocation of Our Lady or the saints. That was the kind of the beginning of the prescription, as it were.
Mm-hmm. What did you think of the elements of, as he's describing saying these prayers, both the fact that his wife and his mother saw him, come inside when he was still outside, and that his mother's later revelation that she saw whatever this was, like on the balcony as they were saying the prayers. Have you encountered that kind of thing around this stuff?
Yeah, there can be strange manifestations when we move into the sort of liminal space of confronting or being present to. In answer to what was there, from my perspective, I have no idea what that entity was. I wasn't there, and I wouldn't kind of give an answer without being present and being able to kind of go more clearly into it. What I would say is, obviously, the manifestations were becoming more and more negative within the story, and certainly there seemed to be like a kind of a parasitic element as part of it, which then began to get angry when it was being challenged. And if you have those kind of elements there, regardless of what tradition you're coming from, that's not something you want in your house. Mm-hmm. So Randy also shared, a little bit of the history of the family, and the fact that his mother particularly seemed to be extremely spiritually sensitive, psychically sensitive. And I think people who have those sensitivities can be a little bit of a bright light to these things. They can draw them in without meaning to in any way, but simply because where there is goodness, where there is light, where there is love, where there is presence, naturally there will be things that will want to live off that or from that. And sometimes they're not particularly good things. What exactly it was, I have no idea. And I know he was using nomenclature like the kind of modern stuff like the rake and all of that kind of stuff, or the predator end of things or whatever. But those manifestations are pretty common enough. The kind of the flickering out of the corner of the eye, the rippling of space around something as it moves. The doppelganger end of things, the fact that the family were seeing him seemingly performing the prayers and the rituals, one of two things could be happening there in a kind of an overlay of psychic vision. What you're getting is a kind of a minor time slip, and they're actually seeing little elements of, what had happened or what was going to happen. The other possibility, and it's a possibility we would often say, particularly where it seems that good things are happening, is the doppelganger actually, within our tradition, can often be seen to be a manifestation of the guardian angel. And so the fact that it was in the middle of a blessing ritual, and it wasn't in a kind of a mocking sense, or because that sometimes happens from the negative end of things, they will ape what's going on to try and mock what's happening and to sort of disturb the faith of the person who's doing it. But that didn't seem to be the element here. Yeah, sometimes from a doppelganger point of view, it can be the guardian angel that's appearing. Padre Pio, for example, used to distinguish between various kinds of bilocation, one of which somebody would say, oh, I saw you in a place and you gave me a message or whatever, and he would have no conscious knowledge of that at all. And for him, that was an indication that it was his guardian angel who had appeared rather than himself. So these manifestations kind of happen along the way, yeah. In terms of the kind of rippling effect of kind of time and stuff like that, that can happen when we begin to enter into that, because confronting the thing itself can be like stepping into the level or layer of reality that these things actually live in or live at. And so you get the equivalent of entering into the kind of missing time, Oz effect, fairy time, pixie led, all of those kind of phrases that are used to describe suddenly finding that chronological linear time isn't working the way it's supposed to work, in 3 dimensions, or that the kind of spatial awareness isn't working the way it's supposed to work. And that's a real indication to us, if we're doing the work, that something genuine is present, because we're sort of stepping through a doorway into the way some of these things perceive reality rather than the way we as human beings normally perceive reality.
It sounds like Randy didn't have to do too much discernment as far as like, is this thing something they want around? It kind of became very obvious that this is something they didn't want around.
Yeah. Again, going back to some of our earlier conversations, a lot of these things, when they manifest, it's more about giving them attention more than anything else. We would say that attention itself is an energy of the soul. It's like a directed light or a directed lamp. And so most of the time, human beings live in a very diffused light of attention, particularly nowadays. We're all so distracted with everything, you know. Attention tends to be unfocused and very diffused. Where attention is focused, so if you imagine somebody doing artwork, somebody doing creative work, somebody who's loving in a very particular way, somebody who's kind of just focusing the whole faculty of attention, that diffused field becomes narrower and burns brighter. And that's why I was very interested to hear that one of the places that this thing manifested more than anywhere else was in the kind of creative room where his mother used to do her work, her quilting and all of that kind of work, which would imply a level of deep focused attention. A lot of people who do kind of knitting or sewing work will say it's almost a kind of meditation, you know, as they kind of go into that field. And so these things are very often attracted to where there is the possibility of either kind of bathing in the field of attention or drawing attention to themselves. Yeah, that can often be something that happens. It's one of the reasons why we get an awful lot of reports of these things from university students who are living a kind of a university-style life, but at the same time are having to really cram or focus attention to, to pass exams or to write essays or whatever. The number of university students who get freaked out because they begin to see things while they're doing this. And that's not just because they've taken substances or lived, to the edge of energy. But sometimes it can be just the fact that they're actually focused will draw these things in. And so that's why all of the spiritual traditions, all of them talk about the faculty of attention being honed for things like meditation and prayer and equanimity of soul, but that there also need to be various spiritual protective practices as well to make sure that we're able to keep our attention fixed on the upper, the lighter, we would call it the divine end of things, rather than allowing it to be used by the negative side of things.
If someone feels they have an entity in their house and they're not getting a feeling good, bad, or otherwise, maybe they're just getting some strange sounds, maybe some objects are moving around and so forth. Is there any advice you would give to determine, whether they should try to determine if this thing is negative or positive, or they just leave it go if it's not, actively upsetting them?
If it's not actively upsetting, I wouldn't give a huge amount of attention to it at all, one way or the other. And normally these things will just fade out and fade away, Obviously, you exhaust all of the, more temporal, ordinary possible explanations. But actually, ordering something out of a house works a lot of the time. And actually standing up for yourself and saying, look, this is my space. I live here. You do not have permission to be here anymore, and go wherever you're supposed to be. And that's about as non-religious a statement, as a way of making it as you can. Mm-hmm. Whatever your particular, faith tradition might be, even things like making sure there are blessed objects, there are blessings done in the house, And I mean, you go back even just a couple of 100 years, and nobody ever built a house or moved into a house without having the area blessed or dedicated in some way. It's only lately we've had this, thing of kind of, building a house and just moving in or moving into a house that other people have left without ever clearing it, In Ireland, for example, there were particular days of the week that were considered much more blessed to move house. So you moved house on a Tuesday to invoke St. Anthony's intercession, on a Wednesday to invoke St. Joseph's intercession, on a Friday, because that was the day of the cross, the day of the Passion, but never on a Sunday or a Monday. They were considered Sunday because it was dedicated to rest and sacred, and Monday was considered a day that, nothing good begins on a Monday. So that they had all of these kind of little elements to it. These weren't superstition. The idea was to combine a particular devotion or a particular blessing with the action in time that you were doing. The same is true even within the Buddhist tradition, within the Hindu tradition, etc. There would be ways and moments when it would be considered more auspicious to move or to enter a house or to take possession of a place, and that would often be decided upon by various, monastics or holy people, sadhus, gurus, etc. of the various traditions there. So human beings have lived within spaces with the understanding over millennia that we are just one level of being living within these places, and that there are others that need to be either moved on or, told that this is a human space and you can't be here, or you can only be here if you are going to behave yourself. And yeah, those kind of elements I think are important for people to recognize or understand. So if someone does feel they have some kind of a manifestation going on, I think not giving direct attention to the thing itself, but beginning practices of blessing or prayer or whatever, and noticing whether or not you get a positive response to this or a negative response. If it begins to get more and more negative, it was quite extreme in Randy's case towards the end there. Blood was being drawn and things like that were happening. At that point, I would say, you need to call in the cavalry in whatever way you're going to do that. But if it's just in the very, very minor end of things, sometimes that can even be just manifestations of stress within a family. And so rather than adding to the stress of, oh dear God, we have a ghost, first and foremost, look to the relationships that you're building within the group or within the family. Look at stress, look at rest, look at those kind of things. And sometimes if people begin to deal with those elements, the manifestations will disappear all of their own,
Well, speaking of where psychology kind of intersects with the paranormal, I found it very interesting that Randy's mother would allow him to do these things, and she was fine with that because she trusted him. And she gave a certain amount of power to her husband as well in this. But she was, a little reluctant to have, outsiders, especially someone from outside of their tradition come in and do it. But I psychologically, I found like, okay, it's a mother trusting in her son, and that has to
absolutely,
that has to aid in the things,
Oh, it most certainly does. And even the fact that as Randy described it, there were other family members there who had gathered to kind of pray and support. Friends and church people were praying and supporting. Many of us on the Discord knew when it was happening and, brought our various prayer practices and blessings to bear on that day, if not exactly at that time. So there was a strong support, and that would be very important. I mean, even for ourselves, when we are sent out to deal with these things, in their kind of larger manifestations, we don't go by ourselves. We go in the understanding that we are representing not our own individual ego, but the holiness of the community at large, bringing the richness of the whole prayer tradition to bear. If I was to go just by myself in my own ego thinking, I can stand up against any of these things, I'd be squashed flat in a second. I mean, if you are dealing with the really big stuff, you're dealing with something that is beyond our wildest imaginings in terms of what its actual unlimited, if it was unlimited by divine authority, what its unlimited power would be. And so we don't go to sort of face off or battle or anything like that with. We go simply as an ambassador of a whole community and its, entire treasury of prayer and faith and compassion and love and all that has been good within it over the thousands of years that are there. And then we speak not in our own authority, but in the authority of Christ. And so that's the element that ensures success with these things. Sometimes it takes a long time to do it, and that's I'm talking about now when we're dealing with the really negative stuff, with the diabolical end of things. Exorcism per se would not be done with the ordinary manifestations of things like human ghosts, for example, or things like that. That's more about prayer and intercession and assisting them to go where they need to go. And it wouldn't be done with the vast majority of poltergeist end of things, which generally resolve of their own accord. But I think what Randy was dealing with in this instance, again, I wouldn't say it was definitely diabolic or definitely this or definitely that, but it was certainly up there on the negative end of things.
Yeah, when it's starting to scratch people and just...
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
It has to be done here. The sort of surprise at the end, which I don't think you knew about.
No, I didn't until you sent me the file. Yeah.
And
it was extraordinary.
His mother sees what seems to be a friar walking around in her house.
Yeah. We get everywhere, I'm afraid. There's I really hope they haven't exchanged one infestation for another, to be honest. But being serious for a moment, no, it was a beautiful moment hearing that at the end, because again, that's what we're talking about, is the community comes to pray, and that includes the communion of all those who have gone before us, who pray for us and with us. So I want to be very, very clear that it wasn't me in any way, shape or form, disguising myself or removing my beard or anything else. It certainly wasn't me, though my prayer was with them. But if I was to make an educated guess, then I think, again, you're dealing with one of four things going on. The first would be one of the blessings that I gave Randy to offer, which is a very, very strong blessing with regard to protection and deliverance, is known to us as the brevis, or sometimes it's just called the brief, but the brevis meaning a short form of liberation prayer, which was written by Saint Anthony of Padua, who was one of the great followers of Saint Francis, nowadays often reduced simply to the lost property officer of heaven. You know, people pray to him if they've lost their keys or if they've lost their wallet or something like that. But Anthony was one of the most extraordinary followers of St. Francis. He received, and one of the most extraordinary saints, he receives the title from the church thaumaturge, which means wonder worker, in that while some people have the gift of healing or some people have the gift of bilocation or whatever, Anthony simply had the gift of miracles. Miracles happened everywhere around him and through him. He was an extraordinary person. But he wrote this particular prayer, or gave this particular prayer to someone who was suffering from negative attack, and it solved it immediately. And to this day, it's used by all of us wherever there is a blessing. So the thing about Anthony is, generally, Anthony appears or is depicted as a Franciscan without a beard, and as a scholar with a book. They're the two things that the two sort of images from his iconography that would be most clear. So it could have been him in terms of his turning up to give ratification, if you like, to the blessing in his name that was done. The second possibility, probably, or the third possibility, more likely, I would say, is one of the people I rely on when I'm doing this kind of work is an elder or teacher of mine who passed on in 2017. And his name was Robert, but he was known as Brother Bob. And Bob did a lot of this work, and Bob was one of the people who first involved me in this kind of work, kind of brought me into it, whether I liked it or not along the way. And Bob has popped up. Bob has appeared a couple of times since his death to assist people who are in real trouble or real suffering. So whenever I'm doing this kind of prayer work or whatever, I would often, turn to the ancestor friars as well and ask them to join in as well. So it could have been him. The last possibility is that what Randy's mom was seeing was a manifestation basically of the archetype of prayer. And one of the things that people often don't understand is that within the Christian tradition, within the Christian monastic or medieval tradition, the archetypes themselves can appear as beings. So, for example, St. Francis met poverty. He met humility. He had the experience of being married to Lady Poverty. Some of the other saints have met charity or have met courage or have met, So these are sort of, we wouldn't call them angels because they're not specific to the angelic choirs, but they are part of the heavenly powers, the manifestations of divine energies in a particular way. And so simply it could have been just the manifestation of the blessing itself. So these are many, there are possibilities. I have no idea which is the right one, and it could be a completely different answer. But it was a beautiful end to the story to know that something negative had been replaced with a praying, blessing presence in the house. And I think that's what we would have hoped would have happened, all of us who helped Randy on that day and with that matter.
Lending to the wonder and the power of it was the fact that his mother didn't recognize it as a friar. She just said, there's a man that walks around in brown, but I get a good feeling from him, Yeah,
it's funny. We get that, it's amazing how many times people have said, I think I saw a Jedi in my house, or I think I saw, there's an old man in a dressing gown walking up and down or whatever, and it's only then when they meet one of the friars afterwards. Because again, like Randy's mom, a lot of people kind of go, didn't they die out? Are they still around?
Sure.
And they're not necessarily aware that actually we're still around. I did have one guy describe me. He was introducing me just as a friar and talked about us as an endangered species. So I'm not sure if we're on a list somewhere, but certainly, if you don't know and if it's not your kind of experience, and it certainly wouldn't have been in the kind of church that Randy's parents belonged to, even to see that kind of iconography. But yeah, it's good to know that one of us is out there doing the work, I guess.
The whole story kind of wrapped up in a way that we don't often get with these things, and
Sure.
this very nice kind of positive end to it. I hope it
Sure.
stays that way, certainly.
And may it do so. And, that's our intention and our hope. And I would continue to keep Randy and the family in prayer. These things can sometimes have a second or a third or a fourth or a fifth or a sixth go at turning up, but you just meet them again and again with a firm no, As one of our friars put it, just because you've gotten rid of the mice this winter doesn't mean they won't come back next winter,
Right, yeah.
So, we keep it going and we keep the defenses up. And I think that's an important way of dealing with things. But certainly in this instance, I think it seems to have been a very powerful experience of grace and of blessing.
So happy that it turned out in a positive way for him. I'm happy that the Strange Familiars Discord was involved. That makes me feel so good. We've had so many good stories come out of that prayer and intention section there.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the most important things on it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just wonderful. And from the, somewhat minor to the amazing, at the very least, it's a bunch of people pulling for each other,
Absolutely. And I mean, mentioning attention earlier as a spiritual energy, I mean, one of the other energies that we would teach and that most of the traditions would teach as well is intention. Mm-hmm. So I think when you have a group of warm-hearted, compassionate people, and I think one of the wonderful things about that channel is that everybody just joins in from wherever they are, whatever their practice is, and simply says, whether it's I'm wishing you well or I'm praying for you in whatever the tradition is. I think, once you have kind of joined up intention in that way, it can become a very powerful force that affects things in a really deep way.
Next week, we'll present the rest of my conversation with Brother Richard. We talked a good bit beyond Randy's story there. So we'll present the rest of that on next week's show. We talk about exorcism. We talk about the Vatican's recent declaration on they sort of changed their approach and their rules on dealing with apparitions and so forth. A lot of people have called us out specifically, like, hey, of all the podcasts, you guys should be talking about that. So yes, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to it next week with Brother Richard. And more. It's just another great conversation with Brother Richard where we cover a lot of really, really interesting stuff.
If I change my opinion on apparitions, will I get a show?
Yeah. I think you have changed your opinion on apparitions and then changed it back. So that'll be next week. More Brother Richard coming next week. All right. Curiosity of the week, Allison. This is a fine little book. Goethe. Mm-hmm. That is not how I say that in my head.
No, me either.
Yeah. It was a long time before I knew how that was pronounced.
And for a long time thought it was two separate people based on that.
Oh, really? Because you heard it pronounced one way and then
read it. Yeah.
This is Goethe's autobiography. I think it's volume 2. The Boyhood and Youth of Goethe, being books 1 to 11 of the autobiography. Truth and Poetry from My Own Life. Translated from the German by John Oxenford. Yeah, this is volume 2.
But isn't it in German?
No, it's English.
Oh, it's
translated from the German.
I saw that font and I just thought, oh, it must be in German.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, this is published by Putnam and Sons, Knickerbocker Press. It's part of a series called Knickerbocker Nuggets, which sounds like a delicious snack or something you don't want.
Yeah, like a fatal infection of the perineum or something.
Yeah, exactly. Reminds me of those. What are those little books we were selling for a while? Those little library.
Yeah, they were called Little Library.
Yeah, it reminds me of those. Except I think this is a little bit nicer.
Yeah, and earlier, I think.
Yeah.
Let me look up when the Knickerbocker Press was in production. No, it looks like it's sometime between the 1890s and 1920s or so.
Okay. Yeah. Little gems of bookmaking. For many a long day, nothing has been thought out or worked out so sure to prove entirely pleasing to cultured book lovers. That's one of the reviews of the Knickerbocker Nuggets.
I have to say, just as an aesthetic object, it's just really pretty.
These
got lots of ornamental.
Old books are just so beautiful. It's someone who really, really enjoys designing books. It's one of my favorite things to do is to design a book. These old books are just stunning. I mean, just everything.
Yeah, there's
it's just
several different kinds of paper and. It's just beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a fun little size. It's quality.
So, I will put a photo of that book in the show notes. If people click on it, it'll take them to our Etsy shop where they can purchase that and other curiosities of the week, those that are left. Just sold an old curiosity of the week before we hit record. So there are still some in there, but fewer and fewer as time goes on. Also at our Etsy shop, Strange Familiars t-shirts, stickers, patches, mugs. My books are there. If you get them from us on Etsy, they come signed. You don't even have to ask. I sign them before they leave the house. Artwork, originals, and prints you can pick up on Etsy, including the artwork for this episode, assuming I finish it in time.
Have you started it?
I have not. I think I can get it done.
Let's see who wins the race.
Allison has some antique photographs up there and some other ephemera. In the Flower Path section, we have, I think there might be one rosary in there. I'll make more rosaries soon, paracord rosaries. I have the antique crucifixes from France. They're going to make really cool rosaries. So I will make a bunch of those and put them in there soon. There's Flower Path t-shirts. There's Petals and Thorns, the little zine of Catholic ephemera I do. There's 2 issues of that available. And more. Ordering from Etsy helps us out as well. It's another way to help out the show, and you get some cool stuff while you do it. So thanks everybody who has helped us there. Just a reminder that June 15th, we will be at Mount Bethel Cemetery. That's 700 Locust Street, Columbia, Pennsylvania, for the Macabre Market. Do you say macabre or do you say macabre?
I think I say macabre.
I believe that's one of those words where either way is acceptable.
It also is one of those words that I probably try to avoid just because, like, I might write it, but I probably wouldn't say it.
Well, we have to.
Yeah.
It's called the Macabre Market, or Macabre Market if you prefer. And we will be there. And I will have books, and we'll have Strange Familiars t-shirts and prints. And Allison has a selection of curiosities she's bringing over, including some skulls.
Yeah.
A cow skull and a really cool deer skull and a jawbone of an ass or something.
Those are dime a dozen, though. The other thing I wanted to say is that this has a very limited hours. I believe it's 10 to 2.
It's 10 to 2, yeah. So,
which is awesome because so much of markets are like too long.
Yeah.
On either side. 10 to 2 is perfect.
Yeah. We'll be there the whole time. We're going to set up early, and we'll stay all the way till 2 o'clock. We will be there. Octavian will be joining us. Stop by, get some stuff. Love to see you. Tell us some scary stories, and see you there, I suppose.
Make a day of it. Columbia's got a lot to do.
That's Mount Bethel Cemetery in Columbia, Pennsylvania, 700 Locust Street for the Macabre Market. It's in the cemetery there. So we'll be set up in the cemetery, and we've done at least one show from that cemetery. This has a number of ghost stories and things associated with it. I think I might have done 2 shows there, and I can't remember. I've been there for 2 events. I don't know if both of them were the show, or I only did 1 show there. In any case, you've heard it on the podcast. It's the cemetery that has the stone where the guy got bit by the rabid dog and carved his own tombstone before he died, featuring a little hand with some blood coming out of it. I think there's a dog on it, too. That's in there. It's fading, though. The carving is harder and harder to see as the years go by, I find. But you can see it. You got to hit it at the right angle. It's there. There's some other interesting tombstones in there as well.
There is the burial of a very early daguerreotype artist.
Yes.
There are a lot of local Underground Railroad members. And
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very cool cemetery.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and all of like the vendor booth fees and stuff went to the cemetery. So it's not like we're just setting up in a cemetery and, so the cemetery
It's
is
sanctioned. Yeah.
and
it's
they
not
are-
like a spontaneous thing.
They are getting donations out of this event. So that's pretty cool. Again, that's June 15th, Columbia, Pennsylvania. That's not this coming Saturday, but the next.
This coming Saturday, though, you want to be across the river in Stoverstown, right?
It's technically Spring Grove,
Oh, is it?
but it might as well be Stoverstown.
Yeah, I always call it Stoverstown.
Their mailing address is Spring Grove. And that is for Chad's Walk with a Woodsman May 8th event, which is...
Not May 8th.
excuse me. Chad's Walk with a Woodsman June 8th event, which is on Sheltercraft. And it starts at, 9 a.m.
And by 2 o'clock, he will have an entire Airbnb built, right?
It starts at 9 a.m. It's at Sunnerwald Natural Foods in Spring Grove / Stoverstown. That's on Lehman Road. The number for more information is 717-225-3825. go out and have a walk with Chad. All right, that is it for this episode of Strange Familiars. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back soon with more. Strange Familiars is a production of Dark Color Arts. Intro and background music is by Stone Breath. If you want to hear more or purchase music, you can go to stonebreath.bandcamp.com. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/strangefamiliars. There is a Strange Familiars gathering group there as well. You can join that and talk with other people who are listening to the show and interested in these kind of strange topics. We're on Instagram @strangefamiliars, one word, no underscore. Give us a like and follow there. Make me feel like an influencer. And I guess that's it. Thanks, everybody.
A murder of crows hangs on that tree. They sing the death of a dream to me. But who is listening to me? And where shall I find thee? Water flows in bubbling stream over rocks and under me. But who is listening to me? And where shall I find thee? It is my mother's son. How long will I walk? Oh, until I am done. What shall I do? I will follow the hum until all of my songs have been sung. My eyes from stars, ring the bell and spread the card. But who is listening to me? And where shall I find thee? I am singing unto the wind, to hollow bones and empty skin. And who is listening to me? And where shall I find thee? My name, it is my mother's son. How long will I walk? Oh, until I am done. And what my songs have been sung. Twisting vines, sticks and skulls, dust and sand and deadly falls. But who is listening to me? And where shall I find thee? Alone walking, I sing for you my offering. And who is listening to me? And where shall I find thee? What is my name? It is my mother's son. How long will I walk? Oh, until I am done. And what shall I do? I will follow the hum until all of my songs have been sung. Water flows in holy spring under clouds and over me. But who is listening to me? And where shall I find thee? Sing murder from the tree, call and screech my destiny. But who is listening to me? And where shall I find thee? It is my mother's son. How long will I walk? Oh, until I am done. What shall I do? I will follow the hum until all of my songs have been sung. All of my songs